Hello friends, a few days ago I made a video showing the whole process of plastic welding a tailgate trim piece on my car. I made it from start to finish so you can see the whole process. If you haven't watched it, that's not a problem. I'll put a link on the screen so you can find it, and also you can see it in my channel. I promised to make this video showing 5 things I've learned during the plastic welding process, and also other things I wish I knew before I started my own welding, so anyone with no welding experience can complete this repair using minimum tools you already have at home. I also watched about 50 plastic welding instructions online before I start, and let me tell you, some are really good, but others would just give you the wrong advice. So at the end of the video, I'll expose these incorrect plastic welding advices you may receive from other places that could ruin your project. Before I bore you with this instruction, let's get right into it. Tip number 1 is safety. As you know, plastic welding involves melting plastic, which creates harmful fume. There are chemical substances. So before you start, clear up the space so these plastic fumes can be diluted in the air as quickly as possible before you inhale them. You can also anticipate plastic turning to a hot sticky goo in the welding process. These hot sticky plastic may accidentally get onto your hands and cause a burn. It's a smart idea to wear a pair of protective gloves before you have burn blisters on your hands. Tip number 2 is planning. You may have noticed in my video, I only plastic welded the back of my trim panel. This is because the front side has a leathery pattern on it. There's no way I can keep the panel neat and tidy if I weld from the outside. The crack in my panel is right in the corner of the panel. To make my welding stronger, I also planned to reinforce the weld by using additional plastic from zip ties. Because I only welded from one side of the panel, the crack may still pop open if the plastic piece is flexed too much. This is why I put epoxy putty inside the corner to harden it, make it more rigid. A common mistake YouTubers make is to just stick the soldering iron into the piece without thinking ahead. Now if you weld a thin piece like a water bucket, the heat of the soldering iron will just burn through the thin plastic and you are left with lots of holes in the bucket. Just a bit of planning. I would put a steel mesh or steel wool on top of the plastic before I press the soldering iron on, so there is no chance the iron will just go through the piece and create a hole. The next advice is cleaning. Welding basically means melting and fusing 2 pieces of plastic, and naturally you don't want anything to get in between these 2 pieces. If you're smart, you must have picked up this mistake I made in my welding process. I did not clean the welding area properly before I start. I'm lucky because the panel I was welding was relatively clean. But what I advise you to do is to properly clean the welding area so that there is no residual, paint, dust or oil. You may also consider brushing it with a wire brush or sand it so that you take the surface area off to make sure there's no contamination. Temperature is also very important. A soldering iron can in theory get up to 300 degrees Celsius. That's way higher than the melting point of most type of plastic, which is around 120 to 150 degrees Celsius. So to avoid burning plastic or melting through, it's best to move the soldering iron smoothly but quickly. This is so that soldering iron is kept at a specific temperature, just enough to make the plastic parts fuse together properly. If the iron is too hot, it can cause the plastic to burn or become distorted. On the other hand, if the iron is not hot enough, or if you're moving the iron too fast, the plastic may not melt and they may not bond properly. Filling material is also important if you want to reinforce the weld with additional plastic fillings. Remember this, although all the plastic pieces look alike, they are usually made of different types of material, types of chemical compounds, like polyethylene, polypropylene, or polystyrene. I hope I pronounced this correctly. Using the wrong type of filling material will weaken the weld, or it may not bond with the part you want to fix at all. By the way, plastic welding is better than instant glue for the same reason. When putting under stress, exposed to the sun, going through temperature changes from summer to winter, things like that, different material reacts differently to the environment. If you use the wrong type of plastic filling, you use a glue or other substance, the filling will contract and expand at a different rate, which weakens the repair over time. Now the easiest way to get around the problem is to shave off a little bit of plastic from the same piece you are welding. If you can find a hidden inside corner of the part, just shave off a little using a utility knife. If you're doing a small welding job, this is usually the best approach to find your filling material. Now let's say your job requires finding filling pieces separately. Look for a little triangle with a number in it. This usually tells you the type of plastic it's made of. you can find another piece of plastic with the same number and use that as a reinforcement piece. In the worst case scenario, you can't shave off anything from the original piece, can't find the little triangle anywhere. It's just probably one way I can help you with in this situation. There is a table which I'm going to put on the screen showing the type of plastic, and you want to focus on the last row where it says common uses. Now if you can find these type of objects you're welding, we can take a lucky guess what type of plastic it is. Now you know the number in the triangle, you can go look for the piece with the same type of material and use reinforcements for additional structural strengths. Plastic welding is so easy to do at home. There are tons of those material on YouTube about this topic. After watching about 50 plastic welding YouTube videos, I want to point out these 2 mistakes that you don't want to repeat. The first mistake people make is just to melt the filler rod and use it just like a hot glue gun. This will lead to a weak bond. Remember that factors weaken the plastic welding are insufficient melting to achieve a hot fusion, open time, seal force, and semi-molten material contact. You have to melt both contact points to achieve a solid bond. Steel wool or thin steel mesh works as a heat conductor to evenly melt plastic in a larger surface area. Therefore, the bond will usually be better with the help of those things. When should you consider buying a dedicated plastic welder? There are pin reinforcement types, there are rod feeding types, heat guns. I think it's only when you have a lot of plastic welding job to do, or if you have a requirement that's very specific. For example, you have to complete a big job by a certain period of time, or you are welding something that requires waterproofing. For example, like a water tank, a kayak, sports equipment, something like that. Then will you consider buying a specific plastic welder made just for that purpose. Otherwise, a normal soldering iron like what I used is just fine. Okay, that's all the tips and tricks I want to share today. Hopefully I've helped you one way or another. If you like this video, please feel free to click the like button. Otherwise, I'll see you next time in my channel. If you wish to watch the full process of how I plastic welded the panel piece in my car, please click on the link before this video ends.